few other things. Margaret is our wildlife education coordinator from the Western region. You're definitely going to hear from her as well here in just a minute. But probably start things off, I guess, with where the eggs are coming from. So we have eggs arriving again any minute. We're just waiting for them here at the offices before we can kind of disperse them and deliver them to all your guys' classrooms. They are coming from Ennis, Montana, from the federal hatchery there. Uh, they will be rainbow trout, and hopefully either the Shasta Lake strain or the Eagle Lake strain. We've been pretty successful with those two. So they will be rainbow trout coming close from home, just as far as Eagle Lake being just north of us, or Shasta, obviously, as well, just being north of us into California. So, taking a look here at our habitat. This is the new tank setup. I apologize. We were not able to get everybody switched over to this new system, but we are definitely in the process of doing that. So maybe start here by just kind of pointing out some of the things or the key features here with our habitat. So most important, I think, would probably be the tank where our eggs are going to rest, which is there on the right-hand side. Everybody knows what that is. There are a few tanks here in circulation now that have our filters on the tank. So the black box kind of hanging off the back of the tank is a filter, which we're hoping improves water quality and in turn improves everybody's success rates. On the left there, we have our aquarium chiller, which is, as you can tell, set for 53 degrees there. We're looking for something in the neighborhood of 50 to 53 degrees. Um, the great part about this new system is, with the exception of the hang-on filter, that filter on the back of the boxes, we've really tried to simplify things and make everything more visible. So there's been some problems in the past with fish trying to bury themselves into the undergravel filters and some of the older styles. This should eliminate a lot of those issues that came up over the last few years. So again, we will be switching everybody out to this system next year, but you likely have some sort of adaptation that's close to this. Another key thing to point out here with this tank is our air pump. So we've added an air pump just to ensure that our little guys have the oxygen that they need. I guess that kind of brief explanation there of our system. Um, let's probably get started here on life cycles. Let's see, Margaret, are you ready?
I am.
Awesome.
So we are right here in the egg phase of our life cycle, everybody. And so we are going to go into a little bit more about what that means in terms of where we were at in our fish's life cycle. Today, you are going to get these eggs, like Jan said. A volunteer is going to be dropping them off at your school today. And you're going to get a cup with potentially hundreds of little eggs in them. They look just like that orange, those orange little beads right there in the top left corner. They're going to look like that. You might see some white ones every now and then. Those are going to be the ones that we're going to be removing from our tanks, because those are the dead eggs. We're going to talk about life cycles of our trout and some other species today, so we can kind of get an understanding of what it means to be in the egg phase. So today we're talking about the life cycles of several different animals, including mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and finally our fish. So, first, to understand our life cycle, we have to first understand what a cycle is. And so, a cycle is things that happen over and over again. So, things that are recurring is a cycle. Now, a series of changes in the life of an organism, including their reproduction, is what a life cycle is. So, an organism is a single living thing, such as you or your pets or the bugs or even our little fish that we're going to be raising. And then reproduction is the creation of new life. So the series of changes that an animal goes through during its life is called its life cycle. An organism reproduces and creates another organism, which is what restarts the life cycle. And it will go through all the same changes that the original animal did. Plants, animals, and even things like bacteria, the little germs on our hands and on our desks, everything has its own life cycle. Now, the human life cycle starts when we are babies and it goes then to when we are toddlers, and then we're kids, we're teens, we're young adults, we're older adults, and then we are elderly. And then the life cycle restarts there. So I want you guys to think about what phase of the life cycle you think you're in versus maybe the life stage of the human life cycle that your siblings are in or your parents. Think about what stage of the life cycle they might be in, and that can help us get an idea of where we're at in our human life cycle. Now, all animals go through a couple things. First, they begin their life cycle by being born or hatched. So everything starts out by being born, whether or not they come in an egg or they're born live, like mammals are. And then the life cycle ends when an animal dies. So a life cycle begins at birth and ends at death. And that is the same for all animals across the whole animal kingdom. Now, there are several animals or animal groups. Scientists essentially classify animals into groups to help them identify species and determine certain traits. And they're all grouped based on similar life cycles, as well as similar physical traits. So today we're going to be talking about mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, our fish, and some insects. Now, what group do you think humans belong to? If you want to go ahead and answer that question, if you know the answer, you can put it in the Q&A box. Perfect. Perfect. Looks like you guys are all getting it right. So humans belong to the mammals group. And so all humans fall under the mammals group of organisms. So everybody got that one right. Good job. So mammals, this right here is a picture of a muskrat, which is pretty common in our area. They're sort of like a smaller beaver almost. Now, there are a couple of traits. There are four main traits that mammals have, that all mammals on planet Earth have. We're going to talk about a couple of them here today. So, first, mammals all have fur or hair. So, they all have hair like we do, or on our heads, or on our skin, or they have fur. They give live birth, so they are not having eggs. They are going to be giving live birth to living, breathing animals. And then they are going to produce and feed milk to their young. So that one is unique to mammals. Not all animals do that, but giving milk to their young is something all mammals do. Um, and they also have complex brains, which is the final thing about mammals that makes mammals mammals, is we all have complex brains. So we have different quadrants of our brain that allow us to do different tasks. Now, mammals do have a life cycle. They begin as a newborn, so as a pup or a baby, if we're talking about humans. Um, they go into their pup phase where they're still um, depending on what kind of animal it is, it's called different things. So dogs sometimes are called puppies, right? Cats are called kittens. Young deer are called fawns. This is kind of their middle stage of life while they're still very young. Um, In terms of adults, then they go into the adult stage, which is where reproduction happens and more mammals are made to, again, restart that life cycle. And then finally, you have the senior stage where, in our example of a dog here, the dog is older, their body begins to maybe slow down, not work quite as well. But for some mammals, we really rely on the elderly to pass on knowledge. So, in the example of elephants, which are also mammals, um, seniors pass on the knowledge that the newborns need to survive. So, while this is the end of the life cycle, a lot of mammals find the senior stage to be the most important of all the stages of the life cycle. All right, now going on to our bird species. There are a couple of things that make up all birds. All birds have feathers, for one. All birds lay eggs. And all birds have hollow bones. So, as you can kind of see in the picture to the right, their bones are not solid all the way through like ours are. They are actually hollow, which is what allows them most of the time to be able to take flight because they don't have heavy bones weighing them down. Now, they begin their life cycle when they lay eggs. So they are born out of eggs and they hatch. Then they become hatchlings when they are staying in their nest still and completely relying on their mama bird to feed them and to take care of them. Um, this is where the eggs, they can protect their eggs and their hatchlings better in their little nest where they're safe from predators. Nestlings live in the nest, and this is when they begin to grow their feathers, and they still rely on their mother for both food and warmth. But they are still living in the nest, just starting to develop feathers, starting to kind of understand the world around them a little more. Then they go into their fledgling or fledge phase. And their fledgling phase is when they start to begin to leave the nest. They're still working on growing those feathers as well as those muscles, and they still rely on their mother mostly for food. But it's when they're starting to become independent, they're starting to want to go out of the nest a little bit. Sometimes this is the phase that if we're outside, we might see some birds hanging out on the ground. They're probably in their fledgling phase, so they're just starting to get their wings, maybe falling out of the nest every now and then. Then they go into their juvenile phase. This is when they're in this phase is usually about the first year that they've left the nest. It's able to feed itself, but it hasn't fully developed all of the adult plumage, which is their feathers and their colors and their muscles the same way that a full adult has. But they're still out, they're learning, they're surviving on their own. And then finally, we get to the adult phase. They're fully developed, their colors are bright, and that plumage, those feathers, are in full show. And then this is when they can find a mate and produce a nest. And again, that life cycle will restart. Birds are also especially fun because they sometimes change their feathers by season. So this is an example of a wood duck that is showing its feathers in different seasons. As you can tell in the winter, it's obviously has darker colors. It's maybe blending in a little bit more with that kind of darker, murky water that comes with snow melt in our water. And in the summer, it maybe wants to blend in a little bit more with some of those pretty flowers and flower beds by the pond that it hangs out in. So it's got those big, bright feathers. All right, now going on to our reptiles. We've got a classic Nevada native Gila monster here on this picture, native to southern Nevada. Now, reptiles have three main characteristics that are known of all reptiles, which are that they have scales, they lay eggs, and they are cold-blooded. So unlike mammals who are warm-blooded, we have warm blood running through our veins. Reptiles have cold blood, and so they need warmth from the outside, which is why most reptiles thrive in places like the desert, which are already really, really warm. Now, the reptile life cycle, like I said, begins when they are eggs. Um, Many reptiles lay several eggs so that they can have better chances of survival. The embryo then breaks out of the egg, sometimes using what's known as an egg tooth. And then they enter that hatchling stage where they might have different colors than the adults. They're still just brand new little babies popping out of their eggs. They then enter the juvenile stage where they begin to look more like the adults, but here they are developing and growing pretty slowly, as we can see in our little tortoises here. It then enters the adult stage, and then the reptile can then lay more eggs and restart that cycle. And most reptiles will defend their young until this hatchling stage, and then it's up to the hatchling and the juvenile to survive on its own. All right, now we are going into our amphibians here. Now, our amphibians are, first of all, cold-blooded, just like our reptiles are. Um, they start their life cycle in the water and may move on to the land throughout their life cycle. They don't have to move on to land, but all of them do start out in the water, and some of them end up on land. And most of them, if not all of them, can breathe through their skin. And so that's how they respirate, is through the pores on their skin. Now, Nevada does not have too many native reptiles due to us being the driest state. Amphibians are very reliant on the water. However, we have a lot of abundance of the species that we do have, such as the American bullfrog. And so we're going to focus on the life cycle of a frog predominantly. Now, they first they go through the process known as metamorphosis, eggs and amphibians do, where they start out, frogs and amphibians do, they start out as an egg, and they will often lay thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of eggs at a time. And that is so that they can increase their survival chances by producing a lot of eggs at one time. Um, then they will hatch into the larvae stage, which in frogs is known as the tadpole stage. And tadpoles must survive against predators as free-living embryos, and they swim and they breathe through gills. So they will be still under the water swimming, getting some nutrients from around them, but they are mostly surviving on their own, just trying to stay away from predators. As they move into the adult stage, they will lose their tails and gills, and they will begin to breathe air through their lungs as their lungs enlarge as they go into that adult stage. Some frogs, however, as you see in this kind of froglet stage, some frogs do remain with their tails and remain underwater, and they are what's known as aquatic frogs. So they're a species that stays underwater all of the year. However, the American bullfrog eventually will lose its tail, the lungs will enlarge, and it will be able to breathe air on the land. They're still great swimmers, but they don't have those gills anymore to be able to breathe underwater. Now we're going to go into our insects, and then we will finish out with fish. So insects have a couple of qualities here, including they have an exoskeleton. Insects also have compound eyes, which means they have those big, complex, layered eyes like you see in this picture here. That allows them to see much, much better than even we do. And all insects have 6 legs and a pair of antennae. Um, Insects might differ based on whether they have a thorax or an abdomen, It might differ the number of wings they have or the number of legs, but most of them have at least 6, as well as those antennae to help them communicate. Insects have 2 main types of life cycles, and we'll go over this again next week a little bit more as we talk about the predators and prey of our trout. But we'll do a brief intro this week into the first concept, which is complete metamorphosis. So, complete metamorphosis goes through 4 main stages of egg, larva, pupa, and adult. And the pupa stage is when the larva doesn't eat or move very much, and it's when the full body shape can form. So this would be an example similar to like when a caterpillar is living in its cocoon, that would be its pupa stage, and when it emerges from that cocoon and becomes a butterfly is when it's entering that adult stage. So when an insect is going through complete metamorphosis, the adult is going to look completely different compared to when it was a larvae in the larvae stage. And so it makes the end result look very different from their eggs before that life cycle restarts. Now, incomplete metamorphosis is the other type of life cycle that insects can go through. And this includes their egg stage, their larva stage or nymph stage, their molt, and their adult stage. So they don't necessarily have more stages, but they will go through the nymph stage, which is important because it does not necessarily include the pupa stage like complete metamorphosis does. However, this nymph stage is when they grow immensely in size. And when they are doing that, they are shedding their exoskeleton, sometimes multiple times, until they develop into adulthood. And so, in going into the spring here, a lot of fish and other animals are going to be relying on these insects popping their wings or essentially popping out of their exoskeletons and flying around the waterways after they are born. And that's a huge food source for a lot of different animals, including our fish. And so we're going to talk about that more next week, like I said. But in incomplete metamorphosis, the adult is still going to look similar to when it was a larvae. They're most likely just going to have wings, but they might include a similar pattern and color and things like that. Now, finally, getting to our fish. We are going to talk about the fish life cycle in general, but I'm going to most specifically talk about the trout life cycle because that is most relevant to the life cycle that we are witnessing in our classrooms right now. So right here is a picture of some very large, full-grown rainbow trout. These trout can get very, very large in certain contexts. They're going to remain pretty small for the most of the time that they are in our tanks, just until we can get them into a bigger habitat. And so we're going to talk about what they're going to look like through each stage of our life cycle. So first, we'll talk about what is a fish, right? Fish, first of all, have fins. They might have a varying number of fins or fins that serve different purposes based on the habitat that the fish lives in. Our trout have several fins, including a dorsal fin that keeps them upright. They have pectoral fins down on the front to keep them moving side to side. And then they have a big, powerful tail in the back that helps push them upstream in the river. In a couple weeks, we will do a trout dissection, and I will talk a little bit more about the specifics of what each of those fins do for our trout. Now, the next quality of fish is that they have gills. So you can see kind of an up close of what gills look like there. Again, in our dissection in a few weeks, we will get a very up close look at what those gills look like. But essentially, gills allow the fish to absorb the oxygen that is coming through the water. So they're not necessarily breathing water, but they are taking in water and allowing that the gills allow the oxygen to be absorbed from the water. This is a quality of most fish as they live underwater. Um, and as I just said, the third quality is that they all live in the water. Pretty much, there's maybe a few species of fish that can get out of the water, but for the most part, all fish live in the water. All right. So they're fish. We're going into our trout life cycle. The fish begin as eggs, and here to the left, you'll see again the close up of what those eggs are going to look like when they're coming into your classrooms today. The fish lay eggs in groups, and those groups are called clutches. And clutches are usually put in a safe spot in the river, such as underneath plants or along big rocks, which allows the eggs to be safe from the oncoming stream of water. And when you get the eggs today, you will kind of see this jelly-like substance that protects the eggs kind of around it. That sticky substance protects the eggs while they are young. Um, However, because fish produce in large quantities to increase that chance of survival, it is normal to see some loss of eggs, and you will notice some kind of white patches maybe in your egg pile, and those are the eggs that you want to use that turkey baster and pull out of your tank, because those are unfortunately the dead eggs. And because they are all covered in that jelly substance, it will kind of spread between the eggs. And so we want to go ahead and get those dead eggs out of there, so that the rest of our eggs can thrive. But again, having eggs in such large quantities to increase that chance of survival. That's a tactic that a lot of different animals use to help increase their numbers. Um, Trout then go into their alvin stage. And an alvin stage is when the fish grows a tail and it can swim independently finally. It's no longer just an egg sitting there, it can swim. However, you're going to notice that um, big yellow ball kind of looking thing on the side of the fish. That is a big yolk sac, which is attached to their bodies during this alvin stage, and it provides the fish nutrients. So instead of having to go out and look for food that's small enough for those little tiny alvin, they are going to use those egg yolk sacs as a form of nutrient, and continue to be provided nutrients from that. Following this is going to be the fry stage. This is where the fish begins to look more like an actual adult fish. It can fully swim on its own. This is also when they begin to eat their own food, which at this phase are tiny organisms that we will learn again more about next week. But they're going to start eating independently, swimming independently. And because of this is the stage that we will go ahead and release our trout. So in about 6 weeks from now, if you guys are participating in a trout release field trip, or if your teacher is going to release the trout on their own, then this is the stage, the fry stage, where they will get released. This is just about where they will start to get too big for your tank. Because they will start to get too hungry, and their friends might start looking like better meals to them and stuff around them. But they are going to start eating independently, and so this is when it's safe to put them in the raw water, and they will start living on their own. Following this stage, as the spring carries on, after they are back in the river, they're going to enter the juvenile phase. And this is when they begin to develop scales, and they can swim a lot better and become more aggressive hunters. So in the juvenile stage is when they will start to really eat other fish. They will eat smaller crayfish and other types of prey. This is when they really develop those hunting skills, and develop the ability to live with the river. Finally, the final stage is going to be their adult stage. This is when the trout is fully developed and they can restart the life cycle by laying eggs. Adult fish typically have really unique colors. sizes and scale patterns, which depends on the type of species they are, as well as the habitat that they live in, because some fish do have camouflage, which again, we will talk about when we do our fish dissection. This is what the adult rainbow trout looks like. Um, they are rainbow trout because they have this cool kind of rainbowy stripe down the side that allows them to blend in with the river really nicely, and which is why they are called a rainbow trout. Um, and so this is the adult stage. Again, this is where the life cycle is going to restart. Now, fish, to restart that life cycle to reproduce, they go through a process called spawning. It is specifically just a process that fish do. No other species does this, but it is essentially the release of eggs by a female fish. So the female fish, the female rainbow trout, will go lay her eggs. Again, she'll usually find a spot kind of hidden in the rocks or maybe hidden behind a log where it will stay safe from predators as well as the current from the river. She will lay those eggs, um, release them in the water in the location of her choosing. The male will then swim over the eggs and then fertilizes them as he swims over the egg pile. And so that is how eggs get fertilized by the male. And then the eggs pretty much at that point are living without their parent. So the mom has done her job, the dad has done his job, and now the eggs are living on their own, hopefully protected from predators based on the spot that the mother chose to lay the eggs. But at this point, they're on their own. And so the habitat that you have in your classroom is going to be a very similar replica to what we have in the river. And so they're not going to have mom and dad swimming over them to take care of them. They are going to be on their own. Trying to survive. And so your tank in your classroom actually gives it a really, really great shot because there are no predators around. It gives them a great shot to grow and develop as they need to. After this process, embryos grow inside the eggs until it's time to hatch. So you will start to see as the embryos develop, you will start to see some black dots start to form inside those eggs. And that is those embryos developing inside those eggs, getting bigger and bigger until finally you'll start to see the tails kind of pop out of them, and that's when they will start to begin to hatch and grow into that alvin stage. Um, this is why, again, too, it is very important that we are keeping our tanks dark and covered towards the beginning of their egg journey, because typically they are at the very bottom of a river, hidden underneath several things, and so they are normally kept very dark and very cold, because it is, if it was the natural habitat, it is January 22nd out in the river, so it is very cold in the water and very dark. And so this will allow our embryos to develop properly and to hatch how we want them to. So again, you'll start to see those black dots developing over the next couple weeks as they grow into those alvin. So today we learned about the similarities and differences between different life cycles, the differences between animal groups and how to identify them, as well as how each group's traits play a part into their life and how our trout are going to be developing in their life cycle in the stages that we are witnessing them. So if you guys have any questions, Jen and I are happy to answer them for you. Please put them in the Q&A section of the chat, and not the chat portion, excuse me, just the Q&A on the webinar. And then we will do our best to answer them. And again, next Wednesday at the same time at 10 o'clock a.m., we will be having our second webinar, which will be our predators and prey webinar, talking about the food and predators of our trout. And we will dive more into all of that good stuff. And yes, good luck raising your eggs for those who are popping off. And we will be seeing you guys later today when we're dropping off your eggs. So super excited to start the season with everyone.
All right, start with some of the questions here. Um, First one up I'm seeing is how long do they live? Um, for me, our rainbow trout, I would say a long-lived rainbow trout would be in the neighborhood of 8 years, but more likely 5 to 6 years for total life on those. Depending on the conditions, just like with us, the better conditions, the better the food, the longer they'll definitely live. So long side maybe as far as 8, 9, maybe 10 years, but it's more likely in that 5, 6, 7 for sure. Another one here. How many eggs do fish lay? Lots of good questions to start here. So, I am going to say it's a lot of it depends on the age of the fish, and size of the fish. And conditions definitely play some part to that as well. But on the low side, some of the smallest clutches that I've seen are, 500 to 750 eggs, all the way up to thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. If I'm not mistaken, we had a couple fish that were up at Third Creek this year that were like, if I'm not mistaken, they were even close to like 10,000 eggs. And maybe not quite that many, but some of the bigger fish definitely can lay a lot of eggs. So, it's definitely uh, hundreds to thousands. Next one here about how many eggs will be in the cup that we'll be getting. So a great question. This year we're downsizing a little bit to hopefully improve everybody's success with the program. In the past, we've given out as many as 120 or 150 eggs. We're cutting that in about half. So the magic number that we're shooting for this year is about 60 eggs. Again, with that in mind, we're really hoping that improves everybody's hatch rates and survival rates by cutting that down. That 10-gallon tank is just really hard to keep the conditions just right for 120 fish. It's a lot to ask of you guys, so we're really trying to make it easier on everybody. So about 60 this year is what we're shooting for. See, how do the trout eggs die? Um, I could happen in a whole bunch of different ways. In our transportation, so just coming from Ennis to Reno, they went on a plane from the hatchery last night, and if for some reason the eggs got colder than they should have, we can start losing eggs right off the bat. If they got warmer than they were supposed to, we can start losing eggs right off the bat. But a lot of times, it's environmental that's causing the eggs to die once they leave the hatchery. Because most of the time, all of the eggs that leave the hatchery are in good shape and good condition. It's the transportation and delivery that has a tendency to start knocking out the eggs. Um, Other than that, once they go into your guys' aquarium, there's God, any number of things that could happen. A lot of times it's shock that's killing them, whether it's water temperature or water parameters not lining up right for them. Um, I guess to make a long story short or a long answer short, just about anything will knock those eggs out. So um, yeah, there's a lot of different things that can affect the eggs. Anything to add to that one, Margaret?
No, I think you covered it. I think it's just Could be just about any little thing that the egg doesn't like. It passes quickly between, especially having that jelly substance on the outside of the eggs, any kind of little bacteria or anything like that that it gets on the eggs can just spread really quickly. So that's why it's important we're clearing out those white eggs. All right. Next was what strain of hunt cutthroat trout will we be receiving? So we'll be receiving rainbow trout, but do you know the strain, Jan?
So I don't know yet. The last 2 years we've had the Shasta Lake rainbow trout or the Eagle Lake rainbow trout. So it will likely be one of those two. I feel like we've had pretty good success with the Eagle Lake, so I'm kind of fingers crossed that that's what we'll be getting this year. But it will be a rainbow trout and likely one of those two strains.
Mhm. And how many trout species are there? Um, I don't think there is an exact answer. I know there is at least 25 different species of trout. But there are also a lot of hybrid species of trout, which is essentially when two different species of trout mate and create a brand new species of trout. For example, here in Nevada, we have the tiger trout, which is a hybrid of the brook trout and the rainbow trout, correct?
Brown trout. Yeah.
Brown trout, brown trout, and the brook trout, and create a tiger trout, which is a hybrid species of trout that we have here in Nevada. So there are at least 25 known species, and then there are several other hybrid species out and about um, that are at least known. Do you have anything to add to that, Jim?
I probably the only thing would be that our main species here are or strains are the tiger trout, like you mentioned. Most of the fish that we plant, whether it's community ponds or across the state, are rainbow trout. Like you said, the the hybrid cutthroat trout, which it was where our Lahontan cutthroat question probably came from there, but Lahontan or the cutthroat and rainbow cross, which is a bow cut or a cut bow trout, as well as brook trout and brown trout. Those are typically what we're targeting or what we're finding in this part of the state. Next question there, I see. How do you tell the male and females apart? So for um, the size of trout that we're going to have, I would just about call it impossible unless we were able to dissect them, which we definitely don't want to do. So when they're really, really, really small, I don't have a way of being able to tell them apart. It's not until they're able to reproduce and they get quite a bit bigger that I definitely can tell the difference. Some of those differences, once they become catchable or they get to be a little bit larger, we start to notice that on the uh, male trout typically have a longer jaw and sometimes have what's called a kype, where the lower jaw starts to kind of hook up, and it looks like they have kind of a hook jaw. Whereas the females tend to be more kind of blunt nose or blunt face or a shorter mouth on them. Um, the females can be larger as far as wider than the male sometimes, but I think the easiest way to tell the difference between the two is by the jaw and the head itself. Coloration, I guess, would might come into that one as well. So when it gets close to spawning time, the males tend to really color up to try to attract the females. So they really their colorations really intensify on the males when it gets close to spawning time. Or the males or the females will also color up some, but not quite as exaggerated as the males.
Okay, so the next question is how much can a rainbow trout weigh? Um, so I think on average, um, they're usually between 4 to 8 pounds. Would you say that's about right, Jan?
For full size, yeah, I think that's a great.
And then, but in Nevada, I did look this one up just because I was curious. In Nevada, the largest rainbow trout that ever has been caught was 16 pounds. So that would be a very, very large trout. I think they can get, you know, up to 20 pounds or so in some places in the world. But around here, average is about 4 to 8 pounds.
Next one I see up there is at 50 degrees, approximately how long will it take our eggs to hatch? It largely is going to depend on how far along they are when we receive them. And we'll have all those numbers to be able to get out to you guys if you want to utilize our when will they hatch worksheet, which is available on our website, I believe as well in the handbook. But you can do the math quick and actually know when within about 12 or 24 hours when our eggs are going to hatch. Because we haven't received them yet, I don't know how far along they're going to be. I can tell you that some years we've had better luck than others. Some years the eggs are actually hatching out of the box, whether the temperature increased or they were just that far along when the hatchery shipped them. But yeah, literally starting to break out of their eggs as we open the box to start to disperse them. Ideally, we'll have the eggs for about a week. I think that's kind of the target from the hatchery is sending them so we'll have them for about a week as eggs before we start to see them hatch and start to see the alvin show up.
So the next one is do they eat their own eggs? And so I would say, and Jan, feel free to jump in on this one, but I think in general, an adult trout might eat their own eggs if it was really desperate for food. It's if food was really, really scarce, an adult might eat eggs if it came across them, especially if it's not their own. They might even go after another species' eggs, things like that. However, it's not going to be too much of a concern in our tanks just because all of your fish will be the exact same size. And so once they, within, very, very small variations. And so they'll all be at the same stage. And so, um, an alvin won't really be able to eat another alvin per se, because they're about the same size. Um, but what could potentially happen is if we kept them too long in this tank, and some of them started to get bigger than the other ones, let's say, they were a better swimmer and we're getting to our food that we we're providing for them quicker than the other ones are and getting more food, it might grow bigger and then be able to eat the other fry. But they're not at least in our tank, not necessarily going to be going after their own eggs since they will all be eggs. But in the wild, definitely possible. Um, if food is scarce enough, they will definitely take any food source.
Next one up there, I see how fast do they swim? That's a fun one. I off the top of my head, if I remember right, it's about 20 feet per second. So they can swim very, very, very quick. And that would be close to a full-size fish. Our fish are going to be much slower, but an adult fish, I think I feel like they can do 20, 25 feet in a second. So they're pretty quick. They're very quick.
Our fish warm-blooded are cold-blooded. So um, our trout are cold-blooded fish. Most all fish are cold-blooded. Um, if we think about it, we're mammals, we're warm-blooded, and we live on the land, generally in warm climates. So we can definitely have our cold days out here as well. But compared to the water that we have around us, the land is very warm, and so our blood matches the habitat that we live in. Versus a fish lives in the water, which is very, very cold most of the year, especially where we live, because most of our water is coming down off of the mountains and snow melt. So our trout are living in water that is, you know, below 40 degrees a lot of the year. And so they have to have cold blood to be able to survive in water that is that cold. It helps them survive and match the water. So they probably feel nice and warm even when they're in the water because that is the same temperature as their blood. Um, versus if you put us who are warm-blooded in that very cold water, it would start to slow our warm blood and it would not be very fun for us. So they are cold-blooded, matches their cold habitat, as you guys will feel when you're taking out some of those dead eggs out of your tank. Your hands might get really, really cold and you'll experience that.
Next one up there, I see how long do they take to hatch? I think that one is going to depend greatly on water conditions and water temperature, but I think a good guess on that one, dip, with some room for error, it's about 4 to 6 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, that their eggs. I think they can hatch in as few as maybe 3 weeks with warmer temperatures, and even go as long as 8 or 10 weeks. But 4 to 6, I think, would be the magic number. So we're hoping that we get our eggs at, about 4 to 5 weeks, since they were fertilized at the hatchery.
Okay, the next question is what state has the most species of trout? And I'm sure Jan could answer this because he has fished a lot of trout in his day. But I cheated a little bit. I looked this one up because I was actually curious, and it says Alaska is the species or is the state with the most trout, which definitely checks out. Trout like cold water, so if you've got a state with a lot of water and a lot of cold water, trout definitely thrive there. So that checks out to me.
I'm glad you looked that up. I didn't have any idea.
Well, there's a lot of states that have trout. I'd say most of our states have trout, just in varying sizes and quantities for sure. That's a good question, though. Um,
Definitely.
are there any endangered species of trout? There are. In our state, our state fish actually is the Lahontan cutthroat trout, which is considered an endangered species of fish. It is still on the endangered species list. And they were actually a species that was brought fully back from extinction. So it was completely extinct out of our area. All of northern Nevada used to be covered by a mega lake known as Lake Lahontan, and that's where the Lahontan cutthroat trout were very dominant. They were the largest species of trout we had in Nevada and still are. And they dominated that lake and all of the waterways in northern Nevada until the 1900s when humans came and decided we wanted to fish those fish a lot because they're big and tasty um, and we did, and they went extinct, unfortunately, but they have been brought back through a lot of restoration efforts. And so you are still able to fish those and see them out in nature in Pyramid Lake. as well as in lower parts of the Truckee River. And then we do have the Federal Fish Hatchery in our area as well, which is a hatchery that breeds Lahan cutthroat trouts. So that's just one example of an endangered trout native to our area that you might hear throughout this webinar series, as well as when you're out and about, because it's a pretty well-known fish, as well as it's a very cool story to have a trout that is brought back from extinction for sure.
Definitely. Next question up here about how long do they spend in each stage of life? I can tell you from our aquarium, again, we're really hoping that we'll have them in the egg stage for about a week before they start hatching in the classrooms. Once we move on from the egg stage and we end up with our little Elvin everywhere, those are about 2 weeks in that stage. At that point, they don't need anything. They've got their little egg sac attached, kind of button until they button up. They don't need a thing. So in that stage, we're looking at about 2 weeks at the water temperature that we have, 50 to 53 degrees. And then beyond that, our fry stage, which is kind of in that about a 3/4 of an inch to a couple inches long. It takes a little bit longer for them to go through that stage. So from fry to what I would call a fingerling, it is about a month. So we're hoping for a week. 2 weeks is Elvin, and then about a month going from maybe as long as 2 months, depending on, again, water temperature and water quality, as well as food. But so we should have 1 week as eggs, 2 weeks as Elvin, and then 4 weeks as fry until they kind of qualify as fingerling.
The last question as of right now is, what is the preferred food for rainbow trout? So definitely tune in to the webinar next week, because we will be talking about this very thing, the predators and the prey of our trout. But right now, when they're, well, not while they're eggs, but when they move into that alvin and fry stage, you're going to be feeding them sort of a pellet concentrated food, which is essentially just a concentrated form of nutrients for the fish. But once they are up big enough to be eating on their own, really, they are going to be going after what is known as macroinvertebrates, which are like little invertebrate bugs that live in the river, and they are the predominant food source for our trout. So they live at the bottom of the river, and they go through some of those phases of metamorphosis. Like I said, we'll go a little more into detail about that next week, but mostly they are eating bugs right before they pop their wings and get out of the water. So bugs is the main one. They might also eat some other smaller fish. If they come across some fish that they think they can eat, whether that's the same species or a different one, they'll go after those as well. So um, that is what our rainbow trout like to eat. And with that, there are no more questions. Thank you guys for participating today, and we will see you all next week, and see some of you today when we drop off your eggs.
Thanks, guys.
Guys.